The Youth Ministry Conference. You guys are here. Come on. Do you realize it's Youth Ministry? You got to see it like Brennan Manning. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Passed away this year. Great writer. Ragamuffin Gospel. Amazing. Let me make sure I start this. Are we up there yet? Okay. Brennan Manning, amazing book called Ragamuffin Gospel. He used to love talking about, he'd go to churches and speak, and he'd say, if you know the love of Christ, if you have fellowship with the Spirit, if you've been moved by God to follow Him and serve Him in the world, please notify your face. And that got about that much laughter when he said it. I feel a little in pretty good company. What we got to offer kids is joy. And if, granted, you would look at me kind of doing something goofy. Well, that's actually where we're going to start with this particular session together. Thanks again for coming back. Amazing. Maybe you didn't. Maybe the children swapped with you guys because you lied to them, and now you guys are downstairs. Not sure exactly why. Faith and the New Adolescents. Findings from the College Transition Project and other studies that have been done on kids and lifelong faith. Sticky faith. Faith that sticks around, that holds on to me, that is from the inside out, is where we're going to be going today. But the research, a lot of what we're going to be talking about, is supplementary to the College Transition Project, which was the heart of the Sticky Faith research. Basically, Sticky Faith research at Fuller Seminary is three schools. School of Theology, which is the largest one in the world that's accredited. School of Intercultural Studies, used to be World Mission. And then School of Psychology, APA accredited evangelical school for clinical psychologists, for PhDs, for PsyDs, for marriage and family therapists. And so the School of Psych does a lot of research in the world of thriving kids and those kind of things. Partners with Stanford University and other places to try to understand students and young people. So the College Transition Project was started with a bunch of people from the psychology school who were getting PhDs, wanted to ask this phenomenon. But it also was me and Dr. Powell, Kara Powell, who teaches a class a year in our program in the School of Theology, to say we do know that the church is losing a ton of kids. So let's get that psychology folks to study doing quantitative research primarily to figure out what's going on. And we do have a lot of research. But as that thing progressed, my work as a social scientist, which is, I'm actually what's called a practical theologian. It's an oxymoron. Because who knows what it means? In fact, other scholars love to say, in fact, a friend of mine who's a systematic theologian, a Bardian scholar from Whitworth University says, it's neither practical nor theological. And I said, thank you. I appreciate that. It's really weird. You know what an oxymoron is. It's where two words don't really fit together, like jumbo shrimp. Doesn't seem to work. Military, intelligence. Sorry, that's a joke. Come on. I'm in the wrong. Okay. How about this? Oakland Raiders commitment to excellence. Does that work for you as an oxymoron? Okay. That's a football joke, and if you're into football, you're not here. You're actually watching University of Tallahassee play a football game. But a practical theologian means I got this, I have 2 master's degrees in theology, worked for a parachurch organization, got this job as a professor at Denver Seminary, and then they go, you got to get a PhD. And I nodded. And then I went on to teach my classes. And about 6 months, 8 months into it, the dean called me in, which I thought was a problem, and said, have you started your doctorate yet? I go, what are you talking about? He goes, your PhD. I said, no. But it's going great, and students are coming, and we're having this amazing time teaching youth ministry in a seminary. One of the first in the country, MA in Youth Ministry, Denver Seminary. A lot of students, egg and armpit relay, how to sign up for camp, how to avoid parental emails as long as possible. Some of those kind of things we do in youth ministry. And he goes, well, in the interview, you promised you'd get a PhD. I went, that was the interview. Come on, that's like dating. We're married now. It doesn't make any difference anymore. I can be the same slob I was when I met you guys the first time. And they didn't find it funny either. So you're in good company, sir. Thank you very much. So I drove down the street to University of Denver because I was going to be rebellious. And it's not going to affect my family. It's not going to affect my calling in Christ or my work. So I'm going to go to a place that has a PhD that's close by. So I drive to the University of Denver, big, huge school I didn't know anything about except their hockey team. Walked in the Office of Graduate Studies and say, hi. How are you? Yes, can I help you? Yes, I'd like a PhD. kind of like going to Walmart. Love, a quart of milk, maybe some eggs. And she goes, in what? And I swear, I don't know. They didn't tell me. They didn't care. Just PhD, anything. What do you got? That's exactly the conversation. Then she asked me this awful question. What did you major in college? Well, I went to the Harvard of the West, UC San Diego. Maybe you've heard of them, the Mighty Tritons. The Women's Division III Badminton Championship in 1975. And we had a surfing team, one of the only schools in the country that has a surfing team. And I was on a surfing team. I lived in Del Mar, California. I surfed every day. I played guitar in Young Life in church. I completely had this amazingly great time. So, of course, I was a communication major. I didn't do jack in college. You guys know what that's like. Okay. And so I said communication. Well, then they said, okay, that's great because we have this great communication department that really looks at meaning in relationships. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of cool. They let me into this deal. And two things happened. One is they accepted me as a conservative Baptist seminary professor. That's the Denver Seminary Conservative Baptist Seminary. All they knew, like you guys, all they really knew at first was I was attractive. That's all they had. And they treated me with respect and voice, and I could be engaged in dialogue in a way that was really refreshing for me. And then the second thing was, and this may bug some of you, sorry, ever since I was 15 and I gave my life to Christ, followed him, been reared in the church and a parachurch. My whole life was moving in the direction of mission, ministry. They started asking questions without boundaries and filters. In other words, their commitment to truth was what we in the church, or at least my experience, was in rhetoric, but not necessarily in practice. Because a lot of times we speak the truth, and I mentioned this in my seminar. We also say, this is what the Lord says, often without even actually going to the scriptures themselves and asking the hard questions of what do the scriptures truly teach. And it was unbelievable for me. The Lord opened up this amazing journey with non-believing folks who were dear people who sought truth harder than any Christian I'd ever met. That was really hard for me. But it was such a gift. Because now, fast forward, literally 22 years, as a practical theologian, what I bring is I've done a postdoc in practical theology, which means theology basically emanating from God's work in the world, and social science, sociology, the concept of meaning and relationships and attachment and culture. So in the College Transition Project and Sticky Faith work, I got all this training and background and research stuff. So everything I'm going to say this session and my final closing session is based on solid look at the scriptures. You may not agree with me, and I may not agree with myself in 5 years. But it's still the common denominators. What do the scriptures teach? What has church history said about the scriptures? Who are we as believers? What are we really doing when we're talking to men and women as well as kids about the Lord? Following him. And then secondly is, we're going to ask any question. What's really going on? And that's where this comes from. So research comes, everything we're doing, College Transition Project, Sticky Faith, Faith That Sticks, comes from research, both theological, biblical, as well as social science. It still may not be right. Before the Lord, we as a community of faith got to continue to go after this stuff. But in my opinion, we've got to do it with integrity. Instead of just saying, this is what we've always done, this is what the church says, this is what leaders say in books and speaking, that's another downside of my own history. I know so many of them, and I've been around so many of them and read a lot of stuff. Scriptures, looking at real life, asking questions before the Holy Spirit together, that's the journey we're up for, you guys. I don't know if you're ready for it, but here we go. 3 current themes going on in youth ministry. First, we're going to take a macro look at the world of kids. That's what we're doing now, the response of adults. This is basically how kids have been treated by adults. I saw this sign in a restaurant not that long ago. Teenagers, tired of being hassled by your stupid parents? Hey, act now. Get out, move out, get a job, pay your own bills while you still know everything. Now, if you listen carefully to how adults talk about kids, you listen carefully, you watch how almost all adults, when the topic of teenagers or young adults, or in a mall or a movie theater or walking around at a ball game or even on the streets, especially when they're in little packs, the expression on adults' faces, the kind of conversation about them, even at the church, the default mechanism of adults towards teenagers is to blame the teenagers. Almost nobody likes kids who are over 13 years old. Now, except for you guys, because you gave up a Saturday. Way to go. But even now, how much do we really like them? Do we only like those kids that do the 4 S's? Or is there something inside of us that grabs us? I mean, I can't drive. You guys have 7-Eleven here, Johnson City, around here? So, you know what a 7-Eleven is? It's like a convenience store. I can't drive by a convenience store and see, you know, a group of 14-year-old boys out there that can't afford a belt, without something grabbing me by the throat. Because I know almost every other adult's going, look at those guys. Aren't there any adults around? Where are the police? How come they're not doing something, really productive by beating somebody up on a football field? Why are they just hanging out? What's the matter with those kids? They're called consumers. They're called, here's a new one, narcissists. I was at Calvin College. They do this major thing in January called the January series, and they multicast it, and they get a lot of people come to this thing. And I gave a talk that I'm similar to what I'm going to talk to you about. And afterwards, I do a Q&A, and somebody asked the question, and there's like 1,500 people in the audience, and then a multicast around the world. And they said, last year we had a speaker. Well, that's a great way to start. It's kind of like my 12-year-old said, you don't want to answer that question. But last year's speaker talked about how today's kids are narcissists. You know what a narcissist is? Totally self-centered. All of life is about them. And I kind of decided to use that to flip out a little bit. Narcissism is a diagnosable category for significant psychosis. Similar to borderline personality, to bipolar, it's a very serious, significant adult disorder. And to take that significant, handled with care diagnosis of a sickness of self-centeredness and apply that to an entire generation of young people is not only offensive to me, but the church has to rise up against that attitude. The reason kids are the way they are is because of us, not because of them. We have handed them the world that they are experiencing and living in and through because they don't have the resources or the experience to be able to create their attitude on their own. Whatever it is negative about teenagers is because we've created a world where they have literally no choice. And yet adults blame them. We love them when they're 3. We think they're cute when they're 6 and singing in the church choir. We'll tolerate them when they're 10. They hit middle school if they can be contained. We'll kind of put up with them. But once they get a voice, once they get an attitude, once they get that face, once they get those clothes, especially from a distance, it's so easy for adults just to back up. They are literally a different population now. And yet we want to prepare them for being able to enter into the next world, into the adult world. So a lot of us, on the micro level, as parents and friends of teenagers, coaches or teachers, whatever role you play, small group leaders, is, we kind of want to encourage kids to be able to be relevant, and yet we want to boundary that relevancy. Basically, that's the bottom line of why kids are the way they are. That's why adolescence is lengthened so much. Let's take an example. This is one of my favorite slides. This is the first Little League team. I don't know if you've actually ever seen this before. Anybody seen this before? Okay, 1938. First Little League team. Notice that they're boys and girls. They're somewhere between 7 years old and probably about 16. They didn't have any uniforms, but I want you to notice there's the guy with the bat. See, he's smiling. He's very happy. He's holding the one bat. Yay, she's got a ball in her hand. Baseball is our 2 words. Fill it in. Baseball is our national pastime. You ever parse those words? You ever dig deeply into them? National pastime. How does that fit with a sport? Because national pastime means It's rhetoric of meta-narrative. We've talked about that. It means this is how we play together. Yay! Let's play together. Let's play our national pastime. Let's celebrate life together. Let's play baseball. Woohoo! Remember the movie Sandlot? Okay, well, this was an attempt. Our young people were not being taught the beautiful game of baseball. It had become more competitive, more about numbers, more about anger, and more about fan bias and those kind of things. So this one farmer decides, I'm going to start this thing to help kids understand what it means to be an American. They let that little boy wear a dress. They're very progressive back in 1938. And so that's how youth sports started, organized youth sports. That's one of the very first. 1938, because one guy said, I love kids. Notice, there's a lot you notice there. Probably you'll notice not much equipment, no uniforms, boys and girls. But what's the biggest thing you notice? Think about pictures of think of a Little League picture now that's hanging in a barbershop or Supercuts or Denny's. Think of that picture and think of this picture. What's the most stark difference? What's that? No hats, no uniforms, right? What's that? Age, right? Age. But what I want you to see is sociologically, age is one of them, and no uniforms. No adults in the picture. There's not an adult. There's no adult getting any credit for being able to volunteer for that baseball team. Nothing. There's no plaque anywhere. There's no trophy anywhere that says, Marge, thank you for sponsoring a Little League team. Marge, Little League. Nothing, zero, because the adult gave it to kids for the sake of the kids. That's now a dirty word. That's a concept we actually disagree with now. It's not all about kids. Kids just need to learn and follow us. They need to keep their mouth closed. They need to obey us. They need to step up, and they need to be responsible. And all the things we say about kids is adults need to not placate kids so much, focus so much on kids. For all of time, all adults, all they did was focus on the young. Because the point of life was to pass on your story. Who passed it on? Not your grandparents. You didn't pass it up, you passed it down. So this guy spent time and energy so kids could enjoy baseball. He got zero benefit from it. Notice that. No adult gets any benefit from this. Where are we now with Little League? Got a little video to show you. Okay, take a look at this. Where are we now with Little League? Okay, well, we better stop it there before you... And some of you may be offended because here we are in a church and they use 2 swear words. All that really means, gang, is that you have 2 things. Is 1, you've never been to a Little League game or a youth sport event. And 2, you've never been to a church board meeting. Those would be the 2 places you've never heard those words before, okay? But I want to say honestly, in my opinion, if you... anyone who would be just more disturbed by that than by the brilliance of the sketch has got a much bigger issue to deal with. When did we first allow an adult to shame a kid publicly for an activity that they're trying to figure out how to work through? When did it first come up that's okay to tell a kid, are you trying to make a fool of me because you might get picked off of first base? When did sports, or music, or drama, or dance, or you talk about an ultimate oxymoron, competitive dancing. The most intrinsically human activity until English-speaking colonists is dance. Do you know that? Every single culture, their primary way of expressing their life together was not baseball. It was dance. But even in the church, in some segments of the church, several decades ago, we even stole that from the population. God's people don't dance. Don't read about David. Ooh, he danced in a thong. Flip-flops, that's what I meant, flip-flops. You know, somehow we have allowed ourselves to think it's okay to absolutely hammer a kid when they don't live according to our expectations or our agendas. Youth sports, that's a brilliant sketch. But now whether it's sports or dance or drama or any other activity, it seems like anything we originally set up for kids to help them individuate. That's the point, by the way, of anything we do with the young, whether it's a child or an adolescent. The point is to help them become a healthy, whole, productive adult. There's a reason we do it. Has become more about the systems and the adults in charge than it is about the kids. And when I'm talking about systems, this is important. It's not that individual coaches are bad. Certainly some are, or individual parents. I'm talking about the system. A system is anything that's more than kind of one entity, that the entity itself has more power and impact in its environment than the individual sum of the parts. Okay? The entity itself has more impact than the individual summation of the parts. So therefore, the system of marriage is more powerful than a man and a woman who get married. What they represent, how they impact the world. System of a family has more power impacting each other and the world than the individual people in the family. The system of a church has more power as God's people together. God knew this. That's why he said, I have one command for you. Tithe. No, he didn't really. I was just kidding. See how many of you actually... Bible. Okay. Love one another. You look it up. It's in the New Testament. It's a little hint. Gospels. 4th one. Chapter 15. Okay, you'll find it. But interestingly, what we've shifted is the systems we first created to help kids was adults that said, we believe in you, we care for you, and you're more and more on your own in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, so we're going to do what we can to help you. Baseball is a tool to help you individuate because we care, both as an individual and as an adult. In fact, we got rhetoric from that. Youth sports builds, fill it in. Character, yes. All that means now is if you commit to a sport when you're 8 years old, doggone it, you got to do that sport the rest of the season because that builds character. No, it builds pathology. Sometimes it builds all kind of negative consequences. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have kids stick to their commitments, but anybody who's 14 and younger, it's not the kid's responsibility to make a commitment, it's ours. Because developmentally, they're a child. Sorry, I told you, I warned you guys. It's not fun. It's horrible because it's not kids' fault. What about education? In 1900, 1% of high school age kids went to high school. 9% went to prep school. You can look it up. It's there. By the 30s, it was mandatory in every single state in the union. Not federally mandated. It was state by state mandated, meaning it was a groundswell. By the 30s, every single kid needed the opportunity for high school. Why? Because up until 1900, you were done with education. You were ready to enter adulthood at 14. That's fit. But then we realized somewhere around the teens and the 20s, especially, that from 14 to 18, our kids were lost. So we gave them high school. And the point of high school was for teachers and parents and the government and the community to gather around each and every individual kid. You can go back and look. I do it in other settings. I've written about it. It's obviously there if you go back. The focus of education was that every single kid mattered. Now, I do have to make the statement that that was not true of every population. You could clearly tell in 1920 the difference between an African-American high school and a mainstream Caucasian high school in the 20s. You could tell. I invite you, if you're not sure about equality in education, if you listen to certain news programs and other things, go into the poorest high school in your county or in your part of the country, and then go to the wealthiest high school in your part of the country, and then go into the bathroom. That's all you have to do. You will know immediately that this is not equal for all kids. But at least our rhetoric was there. At least we had the right things to say. In 1906, an amazing series of books came out that began to really push this nationally. These kids are precious, and we're losing them. So 1906 was a huge groundswell that got everybody on board. And it was a partnership because each kid mattered. Yay! That's education. Where are we now with education? Have you ever heard this before? Audio.
Hello, you've reached the automated answering service of your school. In order to assist you in connecting to the right staff member, please listen to all options before making your selection. To lie about why your child is absent, press 1. To make excuses for why your child did not do his homework, press 2. To complain about what we do, press 3. To cuss out staff members, press 4. To ask why you didn't get needed information that was already enclosed in your newsletter and several bulletins mailed to you, press 5. If you want us to raise your child, press 6. If you want to reach out and touch, slap, or hit someone, press 7. To request another teacher for the 3rd time this year, press 8. To complain about bus transportation, press 9. To complain about school lunches, press 0.
Here's the key.
If you realize this is the real world and your child must be accountable for his or her own behavior, classwork, homework, and it's not the teacher's fault for your child or children's lack of effort, thank you and have a nice day.
Remember that the whole idea of adolescence is you're now on your own to become an adult. Now, I play that for educators. Some of you may even be teachers. When I do just teachers, I give them permission to go, yes, finally somebody gets it. I've heard that in education. This thing spread like wildfire among educators because they know they're the enemy to parents. But you talk to parents who have had even one crummy teacher or one that doesn't seem to care about their kid, man, that can just destroy a kid and it can seep through the whole school. We're talking a macro analysis. I had that slide up a while ago. Macro meaning we're going to get in a helicopter together. We're going to go 1,000 feet and look down. We're not going to get into issues of race or socioeconomics or gender. We're not going to talk about Christian versus non-believing kid. We're just looking at the landscape of kids in our society. This is the real world and your child is accountable. But see, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, we used to say, no, we're accountable to train these kids. They have a bent by God to participate in the adult community. Now that has also become politicized, and I don't want to go there. But theologically, God has equipped every single one of the kids that we work with in our churches and in our communities to have the innate ability, the God-given ability to exert power and influence and to make a contribution. Every kid wants to contribute. The problem is all the systems seem to be lining up only for the superstars to contribute. And here's the downside. Every superstar kids feel like, well, I'm a superstar here and here, but I'm really a mess here. I hope nobody finds out. And so they're all kind of wandering through this maze of expectation and agenda to try to figure out how to possibly survive it all, even in the family. Even in the family, we've all been so squeezed. We try, and especially as Christians, we try to somehow say, you know what? This is how to live a healthy life. This is how not. We got to make sure you don't live, you don't break some rules and you don't go outside the box. It's for your own good, kid. That's the best of us. The problem is there's so little wiggle room. There's so little sense of conversation. Are people there, or they just say, I love you, have you cleaned your room? Hey, how you doing? Well, you didn't start this week. Kind of what happened? Oh, you're fantastic. You're a wonderful kid, but you're not singing in the choir. Did you get kicked out of the choir? What kind of took place? In other words, we always got a kind of a hook to our affirmation. We got an agenda connected to our relationship. And kids know it. That said, there's also this malaise that goes underneath the surface for every kid in our culture because they've just seen it too widespread. If you saw 40 years ago, ask a kid to draw your family tree, that's what they'd be able to draw. This is not meant to be humorous or make fun of anybody. This is simply descriptive of the perspective of family and the stability of family in our current culture. You ask a kid to draw their family tree today, most would have to do something like this at some level. Because they know, even if they come from this system, they've grown up in this world. And they believe that, hey, as much as the words come out, that we're together, we're in this together, we love each other, all those wonderful words we use, they know way too many stories of the downside and the dark side. They can't even trust their family. Even in the best family, kids feel this. I don't know if you've ever been around a first grader that hears a couple that kind of argues a little bit and is still very healthy, but the kid goes, you guys getting divorced? That wouldn't have happened 40 years ago. And then, even in the church, all the way along, what do? We have the youth ministry machine. Way to go. I've been part of this. Could have easily been a kid not in the group or the guy holding the microphone. As long as we get them in, The 4 S's. Sit down, give a talk, give a message, take them on a mission trip, put them in small group, get them committed to evangelism, have them share Christ with their friends, have them hold hands around a pole, do all the stuff related to ministry and life. But each one of them has a unique story in a culture where they have literally been abandoned. Because that's why. Why has this changed so dramatically? It's because of the loss of these 2 words. I mentioned them this morning, but now we're going to dive into them. It's called social capital. The guy that popularized this is a professor at Harvard. His name is Robert Putnam. Wrote a really important book called Bowling Alone. Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone. He's given credit for really raising our awareness of this idea. Those of you that are masters in therapy, PhDs in social science, you use words like scaffolding around kids or assets. It's roughly the same kind of thing. Social capital is where we have people in our life who have no reason to be there. They just love us. Social capital is when you have people that are for you when they're not getting a benefit. They're a baseball coach without getting in the picture. Oh, I don't need to be in the picture. This is your thing. I'm just here to care and to set you up. My job is to be a caddy. If you play golf, I'm a golfer, of course. You look at me and figure athlete. But I'm one of those that, I want to use my clubs. So every club, every hole, every club. That's the way I look at it. So if I, shoot 100, 110 on the front 9, I'm feeling pretty doggone good. And that's only funny if you play golf. You have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. But see, a caddy goes, you may want a 7-iron. I'm pretty sure I can hit an 8. Yeah, I've been watching you, and I'm pretty sure you can, 1 out of 10, maybe 2. But perhaps a 7-iron would be easier, don't swing so hard. Oh, okay. Wow, look at that. Yeah, amazing. You hit a great shot. As the caddy smiles. Lines up your putt. It's going to break this way and this way, 80 feet. Just give it, no, that's too much in practice. Good. Okay, now just swing through it. Go right there. Perfect. Ball goes in the hole. Person goes crazy. The caddy goes, you made an amazing putt. See what that does? It encourages the person to be able to move forward from the inside out, believing they have the confidence because somebody walked with them. That's essentially what we all need. But there's been an erosion of social capital. Here's some examples. Adults used to believe that all kids were their kids. This is even in our culture. This is 30, 40 years ago. You ask, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you graduated from high school in 1973, okay? No, that's 40 years ago. Let's go 30, 83. I'm old. And 3 girls go to their high school English teacher, and she's kind of new. She's 24, 5 years old. She's got a life like anybody. And they say, will you come to our JV volleyball game? And 30 years ago, without question, because she's there to teach kids, she'd go, yeah, I'd love to do that, because that's why I'm here. You want me to go to your game? How awesome. I'll come to your game. That's before she had the ability to text her way through the game. She had to actually watch, one of the more painful experiences in all of high school, especially then. JV volleyball is not that entertaining now, depending on the school, but then it was horrible because hardly anybody actually taught kids volleyball. But so JV volleyball, it was hard to even get over the net. And then you didn't get a point unless you served. Remember this, some of you? So a JV volleyball game would last 3-4 days. Net, oh shoot, yay, okay, yay. And then they'd rotate, net, oh, okay, net. Especially girls, they do all the cheers. And it's an amazing sociological spectacle. Nonetheless, that JV teacher's there just cheering them on. Yay, how cool. And see, when the game's over, she didn't leave. Because those girls would run out of this thing waiting for the varsity, and they'd come run in the stands with her, and she would sit and just walk with them and talk with them about stories of family and guys and future and hopes and dreams. And laugh and maybe cry, but kind of move through life. See, that's 30 years ago. When you asked that woman, what did you do for a living? I teach. Oh, really? What do you teach? I teach high school kids. Oh, what subject? I teach English. But I teach high school kids. You ask a teacher today, almost across the board, what do you do? I teach English. Or worse, I teach AP English. You ask somebody that was a PE coach, coach football 30 years ago, what do you do? I get to coach student athletes. Oh, really? What sport? I generally coach football. I help out a little bit with JV volleyball. But I coach student athletes. See, the point was to care for a kid and use the tool of our activities in order to help them to grow and to thrive. But now it's I coach football. See, they can join my team as long as they stay inside the box and as long as they contribute. As soon as they don't contribute, they're gone. As soon as they walk against the plan, they're out of here. Secondly, adults used to see their primary role as facilitating children become adults. Not just coaches, not just teachers, but pastors, neighbors, grandparents. You know, one of the more pervasive things I hear, because when I go into churches, not just to do seminars, but when I'm spending time with people, and I end up, what do you do, or why are you here? Oh, you're the guy that did that talk yesterday about kids. Well, I'm sure glad I'm done with that. My kids graduated 20 years ago, and I'm sure glad. And I always look them in the eye and said, appreciate that, but you're not done. Because a lot of your kids haven't graduated yet. A whole bunch of them just were born a couple of years ago. And they're your kids. And they always look at me with this, don't say that, thanks a lot. You know, like, what are you doing to me? But that's how people used to see it. See, every child belonged to every one of us. They're our responsibility. They're our privilege. Adults once saw kids as assets, not liability. They were worth the effort we'd put in because the point of life was to pass on life. Adults used to be there for kids more than mere presence or driving them. So what's happened to this? What's cost us? And now here's where kids are. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about what's happened. Here's their experience. I call it abandonment. Some of you may fight against that term. But see, when we saw kids for centuries and centuries, even up till about 30 years ago, saw all of them belonging to us, it was kind of the normal way of thinking about the young that we have this great privilege to raise them up, and therefore we would sacrifice for their sake, which was appropriate and good. We would take time and listen and talk. Now, over time, as this thing kind of eroded, adults became more and more in need of healing their own brokenness from their adolescence. And I hate to mention this to you guys. Remember I talked about the narrative? If this was a seminar on our own duality, on our own pretense, on our own honesty, on our own integrity, it'd probably be a different conversation, but it's still related to the same thing. Because there's not a person in this room that didn't experience something of this as you grew up. Adolescence has been around, therefore, a sense of being isolated and abandoned has been around for a while. The problem is, as the years have gone on, adults step further and further away from truly caring about kids and walking with them. And now I would say statistically, and in terms of our even youth ministry, is there are so few adults that are able and willing to offer social capital to kids. By the way, I can summarize this entire day, the concept of the t-shirts, faith that sticks, is a few people that actually care. It's not youth ministry programming. We did that pretty doggone well in the 80s. We dabbled in the 70s. By the 90s, we had the machine actually oiled and figured out. But as culture changed, we continue to hold fast to the machine of youth ministry by running programs and events and only seeing kids when they showed up to our stuff, only calling kids when they didn't show up to our stuff. Instead of the church saying, this is important and you're valuable. And no matter how other people treat you, I and we are going to be there for you. Without that, sticky faith is impossible. Jesus relationally passed on the good news, and he said, love one another because that's the method that I have instituted for my kingdom. Mercy, justice, reconciliation, all of that has to do with relational integrity and intent. It's highly possible that many of you, when you're done with this Saturday, may go, I can't do it. Because you're asking me to give myself. I was given a few hours. I was running a program. I was a small group leader, but you're asking for something that's even scary for me to give. Yep. I am. But I'm going to finish, hopefully, with a little bit of encouragement. Unless, I leave and we're done. Okay, let's close in prayer. Kidding. Because here's the cost. Here's what kids experience. I'll give you 4. First, because of this abandonment and the erosion, what our research revealed is by the time they're kid abstraction at about 14 or 15, roughly 9th grade, they grab onto each other and go to the world beneath. They create their own sociology. This is what parents, youth workers, teachers, social policy makers hate, is you can't go to the world beneath. You can't influence the world beneath. Technology is here to stay. You can't get rid of texting. You say, I'll get rid, that Facebook. You got to make me a friend on Facebook. But the average kid has 4 or 5 Facebooks. And now they got so many, almost every month. I got a former doctoral student that sends me the new social media companies that are springing up. And every month I just get tired of following them because there's so many different options out there. There's no way for any of us to control it. And so kids are going to dive into that. But we can monitor that generally through middle school, but once they hit high school, you can't control technology. You're done. But you can help a kid to learn how from the inside out to harness technology. But the more we try to control it and hold on to it, the more at a deficit they are when they leave your house. You need to teach them how to deal with technology now. That's for parents. Youth workers, we need to talk about technology. What does it mean to sext? What is sexting about? You ought to be talking about that with your kids, depending on your denomination and if you're employed. That was funny. Okay. You're not invited to the world beneath. There are a few, especially younger youth workers, that think it's cool to maybe drive by that party and hang out and talk to a few kids outside. That is somebody you need to sit down with, look them square in the eye, and all you do is just do the old Bob Newhart counseling bit, if you remember that. No, stop it, no. It's how you train a puppy. You push their face into whatever it is that they left on the carpet, and you just go, you don't drive to the party and hang out with kids. Because what you're doing is you are reminding kids that there are no boundaries, there is no separation. They don't need to be thinking deeply about their choices regarding friends and substances, etc. You can't go to the world beneath, but what you can do is come alongside them in the world beneath. You can be a student of their world and build trust and friendship, and that's what we talked about in my session earlier. But they do have their own world down there, and it really takes off starting around 14, 15 years old. Secondly, this is hard for people to get. There's scholars that have worked on this hard. One is Susan Harter, Harter. She's got a really, really important book called Construction of the Self. It's very technical, but there's a whole lot of other people doing this too. When you hit mid-adolescence, you don't know who you are. So you go into English, you got to be somebody. So what do? You create a self for English. It's fully you, but it's an external you. Then you walk out of there and you see your friends. Who are you with your friends? You're not a core self yet. You don't have a core self. So what do? You have a friend self. You have a parent or family self. You might even have one for father and for mother. You got one for sports. And you got a church self. It's fully you. Here's the problem. As a mid-adolescent, roughly 14 to 20 years old, what mid-adolescence is marked by, this egocentric abstraction, is I live life from the outside in, and therefore the defining characteristic is I have multiple selves that don't interact with each other. Really crucial. So that's why you'll have a 15-year-old kid fall in love with Jesus, become a student leader, be an unbelievable evangelist, and get hammered and wasted on Friday nights. Probably never tell you or their parents. They may be addicted to internet pornography. They may be cutting. They may be one of the biggest racists on the campus, which is not compatible with the gospel if you haven't seen that one in the Bible. And yet they're this amazing church kid. Now we call that compartmentalization or wearing masks as adults. That's not what's going on. It's external selves. Now, Chap, what do? Do you not believe who they are? They're not faking it. That's really them. So you treat them as the real self, recognizing they got multiple selves. They become a late adolescent when all those selves converge. Now, it gets more complicated than that, but that's all I'm going to tell you. Late adolescence is when they can begin to see the integration of the various selves. So what do? Well, in your teaching and in your conversation with them, you bring Jesus to a very concrete self. and invite the Holy Spirit to work on them from the inside related to how they are in their family. And then the Lord has access to the other selves that way. You don't have access to the multiple selves, so don't try to confuse a kid and confuse you. But you can bring Jesus to their self at home, Jesus to their self in sports, Jesus to their self at church. What does it truly mean to trust him in the midst of that situation, and then let the Holy Spirit from the inside out disciple them? Now I'm going to talk more about that after the next break. So, thirdly, peers and friends. For most of us, our friendships meant everything to us in high school and college, if you went to college. But today, friendships during mid-adolescence are networks of mutual self-protection. They're not really friendships. And teenagers will fight you on that if you ask them about it. Networks of mutual self-protection means when I go to the world beneath, it's very precarious even there, so I need friends to watch my back. You've heard of the wingman concept. And they cluster together. It's different than cliques from 20, 30 years ago. Clusters, cliques are where you circle up, you link arms, and you're exclusive, right? A cluster is where you link arms, but you're back to back. That's their friendship groups. So as they build friendship groups, friends are everything, but there's rules to the friendship groups. Because they have their friends in order to create mutual self-protection, mutual celebration of life, they can't bring their friend down. They can't, there's rules to cluster. They can't say their parents are struggling. They can't talk about loneliness or cutting. They can't talk about addiction because that's against the rules. The job is to build everybody up, not to bring everybody down. So guess what? This is the loneliest generation in history because even their friends aren't friends because there's rules. And lastly, this is the most stressed, isolated, and loneliest generation in history. David Elkind, great writer, done a lot of work on this. He says this: people who are stressed are in a word egocentric. They're not necessarily conceited or prideful. They have little opportunity to consider the needs and interests of others. That's why they're called narcissists, you guys. Because they're egocentric. They are. Why? Because they're under incredible stress. The best kids are under incredible stress, and this is a lot of research going into this. You don't have to necessarily buy it, but just look more carefully than you've been looking, okay? Look a little longer. Look a little deeper. Ask a different kind of probing question and see if this doesn't resonate with your world. My career started in books as a cover model. So probably you don't know a lot about me, but that's kind of where it began. But some of you went, oh, I recognize that guy, but not sure from where. Okay, that's where it started. The book Hurt, and now Hurt 2.0 second edition. We didn't have them here. I didn't bring any books with me because I never do. You can buy them a lot cheaper and easier on Amazon on your phone. So if you want to get them, Sticky Faith or Hurt or the other books related to that, Disconnected is the parenting book off of all this stuff called Disconnected. You just, my name on Amazon and you'll come up with these things. But here's what they talked about, is when there are holes in the net. See, the net is as they go across the tightrope of adolescence. Remember that? Well, we want to offer programs to help. The scriptures have affirmed, 1 Thessalonians 2, 7, and 8, like a mother we were gentle among you. And the call as an adult is love one another and then help this family be stronger. But what do? We offer programs for kids. But it's kind of fog-like. They fall off that tightrope, they got nothing. So what do? We need to bring social capital. Paul uses this language in 1 Thessalonians 2, 11 and 12. Some of you brought Bibles in, so I'm going so fast. By the time you flip to it, I'll move to the next slide anyhow. But you can write it down. 1 Thessalonians 2 uses the metaphor of parenting. Like a mother, we were gentle among you. Like a father, we are there to comfort, encourage, and urge you to live lives worthy of God. 1 Thessalonians 2, 11 and 12. See, while a teenager, while a 10 to 25-year-old is going through this thing called adolescence, our role is to encourage, comfort, and urge them as a fan. What does that actually look like? Take a look at this. What we call it is, sorry, the slide thing. I think it's my computer. Project 51, that every kid needs at least 5 non-parental adults to be healthy as a Christian and as a person. They need social capital. Project 51 is just this. Instead of, you can be it as a small group leader, you can be it as a Sunday school teacher, but it's got to be somebody else in the church that has no reason to be there. I'll talk more about this in a few minutes. Youth professional, extended family, small group. Here's what it looks like, though, and believe it or not, Budweiser, that, oh, did I have it here? No, I'm going to show it in the next one. Good. Whew. Thought I ran out of time. Okay. I got 2 minutes. Questions. Why like that? I actually got through it. Any questions for me? I'm going to, by the way, the next session with me is the closing one. I'm only going to talk about sticky faith. How do you actually pull this off in the church? What's the role of Christians to care for kids in light of this culture? That's going to be fun. So stick around. You're going to be doing workshops at 2:45, but I got now a minute and a half. Any questions at all about all this? Look at your notes. Ask your neighbor. If you saw Grey's Anatomy Thursday night, write it on your hand in a Sharpie. It's funny if you saw it. If you didn't, it means nothing. Nothing? All right, I'm going to stick around until the workshop starts. And if you have questions for me that aren't so threatening, cool, come up and ask. Other than that, it's 2:30. Let's take a break. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you very much.